the readings are off the charts, and we have multiple disappearances in this sector.
The military is widely regarded as a national defense force whose purpose is to prevent, prepare for, and win wars. But there are many cases where a nation-standing military force might be used for a variety of other much-needed duties. Things like responding to natural disasters, providing humanitarian and logistical aid, you get the idea. But there have been some instances in which armed troops have been called to respond to less conventional issues, like animal control. In one notable incident in 1932, a detachment from the Australian Army was tasked with tracking down and annihilating a pack of over 20,000 emus that were rampaging through the farmlands of Western Australia. Ironically, it was the birds who won, which dealt a massive blow to the egos of all soldiers involved. But while this particular incident in the 1930s is easy to laugh about, animals can be dangerous, especially those animals that are reclusive, unpredictable, and widely believed to not even exist. Taking place in the year 2000, there is a very bizarre story about something that happened in the city of Calama, Chile. Its citizens, along with those of dozens of other small towns and villages across the entire country, found themselves living in fear of some kind of vicious predator. First, it started attacking their livestock, and then it started attacking people. Things got so bad, the Chilean army was called in, but the soldiers that were sent out to look for this animal had no idea what they were even looking for. The hundreds of eyewitness accounts were never really consistent about what it looked like. In spite of all the confusion caused by the varying descriptions, there was one thing the soldiers knew was certain. The creature, whatever it was, had an insatiable taste for blood. This is the very bizarre story of when the Chilean army captured a chupacabra. The mist which hangs before you
offers you a choice
to pass through
or to escape.
Beyond it are
Stories
which defy
the explanation
and fly in the face
of what we know to be real,
It is a void of both
reality
and impossibility.
of both fact
and superstition.
You alone are left to discern
what to believe as you pass through what we call the fog of war.
Hey, Papa,
What is the matter?
ven aquí, come. Come look at this.
Poor thing.
What do you think could have done this? Wild dogs?
No, if it were dogs, it would be a lot messier. Lots of blood and bites. I'm not seeing any of that. Might have just died. How was she before you went to bed last night? Does she seem sick to you?
No, she was the same as always. I'm sorry, Papa. I must not have noticed something.
Hold on. What's this on her neck? Tris? 3 holes? It looks like something got its teeth into her.
But in the shape of a triangle? What has teeth like that?
No, son, I really don't know.
As with many cryptids, considering that most people argue that they are not real creatures and just folklore or made-up encounter stories, it's difficult to determine exactly where stories of the chupacabra first originated in South America. Although it wasn't initially called by the name chupacabra, some people believe that the creature first made an appearance in 1975, alongside a series of bizarre animal killings. The story goes that one morning in February of that year, residents of the small Puerto Rican town of Moca woke up to find that their livestock had been killed. Across several of the local farms, 15 cows, 3 goats, 2 geese, and a pig were all found dead. What mystified the people was that the animals were still secured in their pens where the farmers had locked them the night before. Still more bizarre, none of the animals had been torn open and eaten, as would be expected from an attack by the usual predators. The bodies were completely intact. The only thing missing was all of their blood. The carcasses had somehow been completely drained of it. On closer inspection, the farmers saw that each of the dead animals had similar wounds on either their necks or chests, dried and crusted blood around 3 circular puncture marks. While attacks on livestock by wild dogs weren't unheard of, as news of these strange killings started spreading around town, it was apparent to everyone that whatever killed these animals was no ordinary predator. As if this wasn't unnerving enough, this was only the first of many more attacks. Again and again during the rest of February and into March, some unknown thing would slip out of the surrounding jungles, drink the blood of multiple animals, and then disappear. By the middle of March, around 90 animals had been killed in and around Mocha. The locals were now on the brink of hysterics, and word of the bizarre events had started spreading beyond the small town. Over the following months, the attacks apparently continued to happen, and the stories continued to spread. On July 31st, the El Vocero newspaper ran a story entitled Vampiro de Mocha ataca nuevamente, or The Vampire of Mocha Strikes Again. As might be expected, most readers considered the story to be ridiculous. Clearly, the rural farm folk were just letting their superstitions run wild, and the El Vocero newspaper needed to fire its editor. It didn't help to convince anyone when the story made it clear that no one had actually even provided a description of this supposed vampire. How could they be sure it wasn't just some kind of common predator, like wild dogs, or even just a big hoax? While a few more papers did end up picking up the story, the Mocha incident was largely overlooked by most media outlets, with the majority of Puerto Ricans giving the remote village of Mocha and its predicament no serious amount of consideration, let alone sympathy. Eventually, the attacks did stop, and over time, the townsfolk stopped talking about it. Life returned to normal, and the incident dwindled down into nothing more than a local legend. Children born in the late 70s and early 80s would maybe hear about it and take it as a joke. Nothing more than a boogeyman story that their parents had just made up to scare them into staying out of the deep jungles or just making sure they made it home before dark. That is, until the mid-90s, about 20 years later, when the creature started attacking again. This time, the killings did not go unnoticed. In fact, the strange and elusive creature and its terrifying reputation was now launched into the international spotlight. In 1995, Puerto Rico once again experienced a string of strange animal killings. This time, however, whatever was responsible seemed far more determined and aggressive than whatever had been killing their livestock 20 years earlier. In a single night, a staggering 150 farm animals and even pets were killed in the town of Canovanas, less than 100 miles to the east from the town of Mocha. Like the Mocha killings, all of these animals were drained of blood, and all of them showed the 3 telltale puncture marks in the shape of an inverted triangle found on either their necks or their chest. But unlike the Mocha killings in 1975, which took place in a much more rural area, now the killings were happening very close to the island's capital city of San Juan. So the attacks quickly became the center of a media frenzy. It seemed like every major media outlet in the country was now running the story alongside photos of the blood-drained animals. The sensational headlines then began making waves throughout South and Central America, eventually even being picked up by both US and European news publications. A variety of theories began to circulate about what, or possibly even who, could be responsible. For example, some were suggesting that the grisly deaths were clearly ritualistic and must be the work of a satanic cult. However, as the attacks continued to happen night after night, witness reports started pouring in. Maybe it was just all the media attention that the story was getting, but unlike the previous attacks from the 1970s, people, lots of people, were coming forward claiming to have seen what was doing it. The problem was, if what they were saying was true, then Puerto Rico was dealing with a complete unknown, an undocumented predator, never before heard of on the island. At the time, some commentators stuck to the creature's original label as being called a vampire, but a well-known Puerto Rican comedian, Silverio Perez, happened to come up with a nickname that just stuck. He forever solidified the creature's place in cryptid lore when he branded it the chupacabra, translated from Spanish as goat sucker. Because of all the varied details provided in the hundreds of reported chupacabra sightings during the year 1995, it's difficult to accurately describe the thing. However, there are at least some aspects of all the descriptions given that appear consistent. The chupacabra is often described as a bipedal creature, standing on its hind legs at around 4 to 5 feet tall. The legs appear to be similar to those seen on a kangaroo. The creature is generally described as hairless, or at best having thin patches of fur covering what appears to be leathery brown skin or even scales, like that of a reptile. Like some reptiles, the chupacabra is often depicted as having a row of protruding spines running down the ridge of its back, and at least in some accounts, a lizard-like tail. In spite of all these strange features, one of the most striking is said to be the creature's eyes. Having a distinctly alien quality about them, they are often described as large and oval-shaped, with witnesses claiming that they glow either red or bright yellow in the surrounding darkness. Its eyes would have to have some level of night vision, as the chupacabra is clearly nocturnal, doing most if not all of its hunting exclusively at night. Its kangaroo-like legs are said to be very powerful because the creature has been seen covering large distances in a single jump. It can also move with incredible speed while crawling on all fours. Even more shocking, it can apparently ambush its prey from above using a pair of bat-like wings. It is also described as having a set of prominent fangs. All of the animals killed by the chupacabra were found completely drained of blood, but without any other markings on them. So in order to incapacitate its prey, it's presumed that the chupacabra is either venomous or has enough strength to overpower even large animals, before then sinking its razor-sharp fangs into their veins. By the end of 1995, it's believed that the chupacabra was responsible for more than 1,000 reported animal deaths. While some might speculate that increasing changes in its natural environment eventually just drove it into Puerto Rican settlements, evidently the creature is not just native to the island of Puerto Rico. By the end of the decade, the chupacabra had become something of a paranormal and cultural phenomenon throughout Latin America, similar to that of the Sasquatch in North America. It's hard to say whether this is because all of the international media coverage got spun out into various folklores, or simply because people in neighboring countries stopped overlooking their own sightings and strange killings, and were now associating these with the popularized name of the chupacabra. Whatever the case, by the end of the decade, reports of chupacabra attacks had been popping up from South America through Central America all the way to the southern United States. While some of these reports are more than likely the result of overactive imaginations or opportunists looking to get in on the chupacabra craze, there are many more people living across Latin America that would say the chupacabra was, and still is, a very real and very dangerous threat. Case in point, what happened in Chile in the year 2000 when the military was involved. Whoever decided what the borders of Chile would be on the map, clearly they wanted all of the beaches. The nation is large but very long and narrow, stretching down along the lush, mountainous western coastline of South America. Unlike many other countries in the 90s, most of whom had long been freed from the bonds of colonialism and dictatorship, even as everyone else was either celebrating the year 2000 or preparing for Y2K, the nation of Chile was still getting used to its new freedom. Various political reforms over the previous century had ended in 1973 with the installation of a brutal military regime. Chile had then endured nearly 20 years of tyrannical rule at the hands of a leader named Augusto Pinochet. Thousands were killed, with many more being tortured or exiled. The Chilean people then finally succeeded in ousting the dictator in 1990, once again paving the way for a democratic government. Still, after living nearly 2 decades under Pinochet's iron fist, the fear, paranoia, and violence perpetrated by the government under the former military regime weren't easy to forget. The year 2000 was seen as a year of hope, with many Chileans looking forward to a new millennium, one defined by national healing, freedom, democracy, and economic prosperity. But while their political fears were subsiding, a new and very unexpected kind of terror was about to be met in the first few months of the new year: the chupacabra. According to those who lived through the ordeal, the trouble first began on the night of April 12th. Oddly enough, it had nothing to do with dead farm animals, at least not at first. What happened on April 12th took place just outside the small town of Tucapel, nestled in the heart of Chile's central Biobío region. Residents of the town reported seeing strange lights moving across the sky over the nearby countryside. The eyewitnesses said the cluster of lights quietly came down out of the clouds, like an airplane when it lands, before then disappearing from sight beyond the trees. Curious, the townsfolk then went out the next morning to see if something had crashed. All they found was a large patch of dried brambles, a type of plant known to grow various berries, that had clearly been flattened, but it was surrounded on all sides by vegetation that hadn't been touched. It looked as if something had landed right on top of the brambles and then flown off. Clearly, it was not an airplane, and without making any noise, combined with the dense jungle, it hardly seemed possible that it was some kind of helicopter. Disturbed by the strange event, residents both within the town and those on the small farming homesteads dotting the outskirts were unsure of what to make of the strange lights and the crushed brambles. But then a few weeks later, things got even stranger and now terrifying.
Oh, come on, hijos. It is time to go home. You boys are gonna get your food, and I am gonna go lay down, because I am tired. Un momento. Hey, Julio, what the hell is this? You said all the cattle were rounded up, and I come out to find a bull running around the pasture? Julio! Leave it to the old man to close up shop. Damn kid can't tell his ass from his elbow. Hey, damned bull! Get over here! You're really gonna make an old man walk out there, huh? All right, What the hell is that?
It was around 8 p.m. on Saturday, April 29th. Jose Ishmael Pino looked weathered. Certainly, being 59, it was partially his age catching up to him, but it had also been a very long and tiring day. He was in the process of closing up shop before his shift ended on the Esperance Ranch near Tucapel. By this point in the night, Jose was all alone. Most, if not all, of his fellow workers had already clocked out, leaving him to do the final checks around the barn before calling it a night. Accompanied by two of the ranch's resident guard dogs, satisfied that everything was locked up tight, Jose moved towards the entrance of the barn to leave. But just as he reached the open doors, which faced out towards the pasture, he saw something that irked him. The other workers had assured him that all of the livestock had been rounded up and secured for the night. But now, looking out over the pasture, Jose saw that one of the bulls was still out, clearly having a grand old time running around the open field. Jose sighed. So much for getting off work on time. Starting to walk towards the bull, he cursed and called out to it, hoping it would trot over and save him the trouble of walking all the way across the pasture to get it. The animals all knew Jose and usually did listen to him. When he called out, the bull stopped in the middle of the field and then turned its head to look at him. And that's when the hairs on Jose's neck stood up. That wasn't a bull. In fact, now that his eyes had adjusted to the darkness outside, Jose couldn't really make out what it was. He could at least tell that it was unlike anything he had ever seen. In a later interview with Jose Traynor, the then editor of the online magazine UFO Roundup, Jose described his encounter with what he later decided must have been a chupacabra.
Había un gran toro corriendo salvaje.
There was a large bull running wild. I was walking along when I saw something, and I thought that was it. "Hey, damned bull," I shouted, and then I saw that it wasn't. It hardly moved. It just stood there, looking at me. It stood about 1.5 meters tall, like a big monkey, with long, clawed arms, enormous fangs protruding from its mouth, as well as a pair of wings. I was so scared, I turned and I ran back for the hounds. I set them loose and let them chase after this, I call it the bird. Cochoro, one of the dogs, came back with a blood-stained neck.
Having been chased off the Esperance Ranch by the dogs, the chupacabra evidently wound up hunting elsewhere. At dawn, 4 sheep and 1 cow were found dead across 2 different farms. As with all the previous incidents, what shocked the locals was to hear the farmers saying that rather than being torn apart by something like a puma or a pack of wild dogs, each of the animals was entirely intact but drained of all of its blood, with unusual punctures on their necks. Combined with the story of the ranch hand Jose's sighting of a strange animal, the word about the livestock deaths spread like wildfire over Tucapel and its surrounding communities. Worrying about their own safety in the panic, many locals took measures to defend themselves. Jose's employer, Jorge Venegas, the owner of the 75-acre Esperance Ranch, began letting his employees leave work early, ensuring they all got home safely before nightfall.
We don't know what we're dealing with here. I'm not so concerned about the attacks on the animals, but I have 2 children, 12 years old and 15 years old, and I'm not going to let anything happen to them. In fact, right now I'm going to get a floodlight to see at night, in case something weird shows up.
Jorge had been one of the witnesses of the strange flying lights in the sky a few weeks earlier. The combination of strange events now meant that he would be sleeping with one eye open and a loaded shotgun next to his bed. For outsiders, the chupacabra might seem like nothing but a ludicrous myth, a sort of South American boogeyman or Bigfoot legend. But to the magazine editor Joseph Trainer, who interviewed these men, it was clear that the threat posed by these creatures was taken very, very seriously in communities like Tucapel. At least Jorge Venegas said as much during his interview with Trainer, all while holding the same shotgun he had started to carry with him everywhere he went following these attacks. South American boogeyman or Bigfoot legend. But to the magazine editor Joseph Trainer, who interviewed these men, it was clear that the threat posed by these creatures was taken very, very seriously in communities like Tucapel. At least Jorge Venegas said as much during his interview with Trainer, all while holding the same shotgun he had started to carry with him everywhere he went following these attacks. In spite of the growing widespread panic about a chupacabra, or even multiple chupacabras, stalking through the jungles, at least some of the Tucapel residents tried to argue for a more likely culprit. After all, when interviewed by the Chilean newspaper Crónica, an anonymous manager of the Raúl Perez farm said that the region did have a recurring problem with packs of wild dogs. There was one recorded incident from 7 years earlier when wild dogs managed to kill some 70 sheep in a single night. But a pack of wild dogs would likely have ripped the animals apart, not simply drained their blood. And packs of dogs would likely have been seen and reported. Not to mention that Jose Pino's encounter on the ranch, followed by several attacks, was just one in a wave of similar incidents that had started happening all over Chile. Far to the north, there had also been an incident in the city of Calama. One night in mid-April, only a few days after the strange lights descended from the skies over Tucapel, a young man was biking home along an empty street in Calama. As he passed by the local Lions Club, He said that a strange groaning sound drew his attention to a patch of tall grass by the wall of the building, about 50 meters away from him. And that's when he saw a creature unlike anything he'd ever seen. He said its eyes were glowing intensely bright in the dark. And then looking down, he saw there was a corpse of a dog at its feet. The young man then stopped and nearly fell off his bike and remained completely still, unsure of what to do. But the chupacabra moved first. It picked up the dog in what looked like clawed hands before sprinting toward him. The man said he never had a chance to react. It was way too fast. In a moment, the creature had cleared the 50-meter distance between them, reaching to about 10 meters off to his side, before then veering away and disappearing into the night with the dog. His legs now trembling, heart racing, he said he then hopped back on his bike and started pedaling as hard as he could and didn't stop until he got home. Most people who heard about the young man's encounter by the Lion Club were terrified, but not everyone in Calama was scared by the rumors. A few days afterward, a group of 8 teenagers who apparently had nothing better to do set out into the countryside late at night, excited at the prospect of encountering this so-called blood-sucking chupacabra. It doesn't seem like they actually thought they would find it, but much to their horror, apparently they did. It was sometime early in the morning of April 24th. The teenagers were exploring along the banks of the River Loa when they saw something they later described as a short, bipedal creature covered in a thin layer of hair. When the creature saw them, it fled. They were startled when it took one leap, covered an incredible distance in the air, and then darted into a nearby cave. Now realizing that this idea had been very stupid, the frightened teenagers turned around and booked it back to town. And now the added testimony of 8 teenagers having encountered a real chupacabra further fanned the flames of Calama's growing paranoia. More reports of the chupacabra started coming in. A few nights after the teenagers' encounter, several locals, residents living atop a nearby hill, claimed to have seen a reptilian-looking creature scurrying up the sheer face of a distant cliff. They said that not only could it move very quickly, but it clearly had 2 bat-like wings. When it finally reached the summit of the cliff, they said it began making a series of growls and screams that echoed over the darkened countryside. They said that not only could it move very quickly, but it clearly had 2 bat-like wings. When it finally reached the summit of the cliff, they said it began making a series of growls and screams that echoed over the darkened countryside.